Welcome back to my channel. I'm your host Steven. Today's episode is the term blown out on a clarinet. How does a clarinet get blown out? So I'm sure you've heard of the term blown out before. Companies and people would tell you to get a new clarinet every 5 years before it gets blown out, or that if you have an old clarinet that it may be blown out. But what does blown out actually mean? What could it be? What can change a clarinet that can make it blown out? First of all, if there's no physical damage such as to the wood, the tenons, or the sockets, tenons being these, sockets being these internal parts they go into, then how does a clarinet get blown out? And assuming you oil your clarinet so the wood doesn't get damaged on the inside, of course, no physical damage. But let's review some of those issues that could make a clarinet blown out. First of all, let's talk about pads and basically bladder pads. Bladder pads over a short number of years could get porous. The surface can. And this porosity allows air penetration into the pad itself. This can take away from some of the clear, powerful tones that one expects to hear from the instrument. It's not really a leak, but it is a leak in a way, and it can be considered part of being blown out. Of course, a repad or refurbishment can fix this problem. With leather pads, they're a bit more durable than skin pads, and over a long period of time can also degrade to a higher porosity. Of course, replacing those too can fix it. With cork pads, even though cork pads can cause issues if they're not cut properly in relation to the grain, if the grain pattern is across the pad, it can allow air to escape and of course create a leak. So the quality of cork pads that you have installed and how they're installed and how they're cut, if they're cut individually, can cause issues. Remember, any extremely small air leak anywhere in the clarinet can reduce the overall tone and response of the clarinet. Even just a little bit. Enough to where more experienced players may hear a slight difference, because a slight leak will take away from the overall depth and breadth of the tone. So we have to remember that even old pads can cause these issues. Next we get to sloppy keywork. If you take your keys and try to move them up and down, do they move up and down? So if you play a lot, your keywork may get sloppy over time between the posts. And the trouble is this allows the pads to move up and down. Now you know that the pads have these indents on them from the tone holes. But if they move up and down, this in itself can create a very small leak. Therefore, a mechanical refurbishment is needed to prevent that loose keywork. This can be part of being blown out also. Now on older clarinets, actually right now consider anything in the early 70s and before an older clarinet. Here's one of the wraparound tone hole. As I remember, a shop sent me a clarinet before that the owner really wanted fixed, but it was missing something in its tonal quality and the shop couldn't figure it out. And I determined, because I have really light finger pressure when I play, really light most of the time, is I found out in a long-about way that there's porosity in the tone holes over time, which could lead to a clarinet getting blown out, of course. And usually there's an easy solution to that. So over time, even the wood can get porous, and this can happen on the tone hole chimneys. When they get porous, the air pressure can leak around your finger pads and thus create a leak, causing a reduction in tonal qualities. A fix to this, as I've mentioned in multiple other older videos, is, for instance, I will use liquid shellac in all older clarinets, early 70s and before now, on the inside of each tone hole, thus eliminating any possibility of a large port to let air escape and reducing the tonal quality. In other words, if there's a reduction in tonal quality, thus leading to a blown out clarinet, there usually is a solution to that particular problem. This requires a higher-end technician to figure it out and to know it. Sometimes there's even stranger issues. For instance, I had a clarinet before that went through a dramatic temperature change, and the outer wood expansion was much faster than the inner bore expansion. The wood actually separated. The layers of the wood inside the bore to the outside actually separated and created a cavity that is parallel with the body and had a crack going into the bore. You couldn't see this from the outside, but you could visually see it from the inside, especially with a borescope. This required me to heat up the bore, insert high flow liquid superglue, and then use an expanding lap, or basically cylinder, that lets you expand it slightly and push the inner bore up against the other wood, basically eliminating the cavity that was in there. A real weird issue, but it made the clarinet play really strangely, as it had an internal cavity which caused a strange internal leak in a way. But what I'm getting at is that if you have a clarinet that is blown out, then there's probably a reason for it. If you play test an existing clarinet against a new setup clarinet, you should expect the new clarinet to have better qualities all the way around. But if you take your existing clarinet and get a high quality refurbishment, notice I said high quality. If you spend anywhere from $149 to $800 plus for new pads, refurbishment, and everything else, I can tell you the $149 work is probably nowhere near as accurate, providing fluid keywork, proper cork pad heights, and flushness. In other words, a $149 work on a clarinet will let it play, but not compared to the hopefully higher quality work. After all, if you compare it to a new clarinet, how much do you value that new clarinet's pad, cork work, and key setup? Probably much more than $149, right? Anyways, high quality work, you can expect it to play like it used to and as good as any new clarinet. Of course, there's other items. A clarinet could have pads that are too close to a tone hole, corks too thick, putting pads too close to a tone hole, cuts in pads, and other mechanical issues. Nothing that a top tech couldn't fix. When pads are too close, they'll make it sound stuffy, play flat, and have weird response issues. Another issue is the register pip. If it's removed and reinstalled, it could cause a leak around it, but that's why techs usually melt wax around it to seal any potential leaks. Once again, nothing a top tech couldn't fix. But what about intonation and response? Well, everything I just mentioned can affect intonation and response. So in my opinion about a clarinet being blown out is that there are issues that a top tech can fix. Many people are worried about costs. Once you get a top refurbishment, you're spending a good chunk of money that could go towards a new clarinet. And then we get into another realm here. A new clarinet has newer keywork. And depending upon which generation of clarinets you're comparing, you could make a good step up in keywork, intonation, and response just due to newer technology. I should mention, since the original R13, there's been a significant improvement in register location and internal diameter and shape. And that's discussed in my R13 versus RC and S1 video, which I've yet to publish actually. So what are your opinions about blown out clarinets? And what are your thoughts of a blown out clarinet? To me, there's nothing that can't take an older clarinet, have it refurbished and playing like new with incredible response and intonation as if it's new. But of course, there is newer technology which can make things even better. And that's one reason why I play a newer RC Prestige versus my older R13. Now, interesting item here is on my older R13, which is a 1967 model, I believe. I love the intonation response and the tonal quality, but I play on it a medium tip jazz mouthpiece, which has a rollover baffle, which increases its response. And on my RC Prestige, I actually play a nice symphony piece on it, which doesn't have that significant rollover baffle, which increases its lower depth tones because of the pip design location, increases its response. So there's a lot of things related to newer technology that wasn't on the older clarinets or even available. Anyways, I want to thank you for listening today. Any questions, comments, please post them down below. Don't forget to give a thumbs up, like, share, and subscribe. You gotta love knowledge, gotta love life, gotta love clarinets. We'll see you next time.